The boss likes hot dogs. You know, it's National Hot Dog Day.
He won't stop talking about it around the office.
Ever since you threw that hot dog party. Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the Liberty Portal podcast. Thanks for joining us today. We have a very special guest in-house. You guys might remember him from some recent episodes. David Rand has decided to rejoin us. How are you, buddy?
I was only gone for like a week.
It was at least 2 weeks.
Oh, fair enough.
I mean, maybe one episode, but
it's good
long enough we miss you. So,
oh, thank you.
And we got Kyle Mack back in the house, Captain Quigley on Twitter.
Howdy. I'm glad to be here.
We are lacking our boy Evan on the ones and twos back there. He's got some obligations. So if things go out of focus, well, that's because we're missing our main guy. But we've got some really interesting things to talk about today from the past week or so. Tucker Carlson did a presidential panel with the Blaze and absolutely destroyed a handful of presidential candidates. We're going to look at some of that. We're going to talk about what this might mean. Is this the rise or the resurgence of the old right? What is that? What is the history behind it? We're going to get into it. Also, the IRS whistleblowers are in a hearing right now. They have confirmed that much of what was suspected about Hunter Biden's tax evasion is true. They've testified in support of that. And they've even gone as far as to suggest that their investigation was impeded actively by the DOJ. So we're going to look at that as well. And lastly, is censorship coming to AI the same way that it has come to social media? We're going to get into that. What does the regulatory environment look like coming forward? Lots of interesting things to talk about. Before we do, wherever you are, please do like, subscribe, comment, follow, send this to your friends. Hit the notification bell if you're on YouTube so you don't miss an episode, and let's get into it. So starting with Tucker Carlson, are we going to watch some clips here, Kyle? Do we have some stuff to pull up?
We do. I was just grabbing some of this right here. We could go into a few different directions here. There was Tim Scott that he dismantled. There was Mike Pence that he dismantled. Like, where do we want to start with?
Tim Scott.
Let's go in alphabetical order.
Yeah.
Kidding. Let's go with Tim Scott.
So, a nation that great has to beware of threats to its very existence.
Absolutely.
Yesterday, Biden mobilized reserves. What do you think of that? And are you concerned that we're moving, as we seem to be, toward war with Russia?
Yeah, so I would say that without any question, we should never allow American soldiers to be engulfed into the challenge between Ukraine and Russia. Our boots on the ground should not be there. The ability my mama wanted a preacher, so I'm going to stand up and do it the Southern way.
Preach!
Hallelujah! So, literally, I think one of the failures of President Biden has been his inability to articulate America's national vital interest in the conflict or the genocide in Ukraine. America's national vital interest is degrading the Russian military. When we degrade the Russian military, we make sure that our home front is safer and that our NATO ally partners that would cause us to send soldiers over is safe. When we have the land contiguous with Ukraine safe, we keep our American soldiers at home, and our primary objective should only be to engage when America's vital national interests are being engaged in. Unfortunately, President Biden has no ability to understand and appreciate what that looks like.
Wait, may I ask you, so you're saying that it's in our national interest, vital national interest, to degrade the Russian military, in other words, to fight Russia with other people's soldiers?
I would say it this way. If you think about
That's exactly what he just
the
said,
world order that we established after World War II, if you think about a rules-based system, where does the rules-based system come from? It comes from this nation, our Judeo-Christian foundation, that says that there are rules of the road, that there is something called absolute truth. And we established that. As a part of that absolute truth, what we're trying to do is make sure that our home front remains safe. keeping our home front safe means evaluating the actual threats to our country. The most immediate military threat that could happen is Russia. Why is a good question. You look at their sixth generation jets, you look at their hypersonic weapons, you look at their nuclear arsenal. Everything that we do that degrades the Russian military is good for America. You look at the long-term threat to our nation, it's China. Their existential threat that we face long-term becomes China. You look at this rising axis of evil that we're seeing being formed, it's Russia, China, and Iran. Breaking that to pieces before it gets started, I think, is in our vital interest.
So on the day last February that Russia invaded eastern Ukraine, Russia and China were not allied. But within weeks of the sanctions that we applied and the stated intent of the Biden administration to effectively wage war with Russia, you saw an alignment which now hardened between Russia and China. The United States military cannot, as you know, since you oversee it as a member of the Senate, cannot actually defeat Russia and China united. And so it would seem that the Biden policies have created a larger threat, no?
Well, I would say it by looking back to 2014. There are two times that we've seen incursions in Ukraine that creates peril for America. The first time was under President Obama when he drew that red line in Syria and nothing happened, which gave permission to Putin to come in and take Crimea. The second time we saw was when President Biden sat back and watched as Scholz in Germany led the Western alliance to provide resources to Ukraine, which was a mistake colossal on our part. So what you saw was President Biden saying to Putin, I'm going to give you a list of areas that we don't want you to have cyber attacks. Weakness. Second that we saw.
So I think Tim Scott was probably not expecting a lot of pushback from Tucker on his perspective there. David, what do you think of Tim Scott's hawkish response and Tucker's response to that?
I suspect Tucker Carlson has some kind of hypnotism he's doing right now. Because like if you notice the way they connect eyes every time Tim Scott's like has to look away. He's got to stand. He's got to do something else because he's like, I can't talk with this dude looking at me.
He just sees that Tucker stank face and he's like, he's going to turn to stone if he looks him in the eye.
I feel bad. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, what was most interesting to me was like, Tim Scott kind of gave an answer that I think a lot of people would generally agree with in the very beginning, but then he like shifted what he was saying. And that's where Tucker was like clapping for him in the beginning. And then all of a sudden, Tim Scott starts talking about like weakening Russia and all these things. And that's when the Tucker stank face just gets like, wait, where's this going? Like, I think he like almost didn't expect it at first.
Yeah, kind of took a turn.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the interesting thing there is a couple of things. We already have boots on the ground in Ukraine. We already know this. This was part of the leaks on the Minecraft server links. Remember that? Where we have intelligence agents and other special forces type agents on the ground in Ukraine. That was already confirmed. So that's just, if he was concerned about that, then he's on the wrong side of the war already, right? If he actually opposes the war of America getting involved. Second, he's repeatedly voted for funding in Ukraine. And, you know, he's trying to justify that, obviously. I like Tim Scott on a lot of issues. He's a great articulator on a lot of issues. He's been a great defender of the Second Amendment and other great stuff. But on this, he's listening to the wrong people. And I suspect that because he actually blends in two different basic schools of international political theory. One is realism. So when you hear him say his vital national interest, what he's saying is that countries, the realism school says countries have this innate, because we're in a anarchistic international scene where there's no government above the governments, that these governments have an innate propensity, maybe duty, to pursue their self-interest. And that's what you're trying to navigate in international diplomacy is recognizing and dealing with that fact. The other one, and he kind of starts out with that and saying he has to articulate the vital national interest, and that's important for democracy's sake, right? He's making a good point there. But then he says it is in the interest because of the other school of philosophy, idealism, which is that the rule-based order, when he talks about that, he's talking about idealism, that we're supposed to establish these structures to try to limit states to prevent war from happening. But then he kind of bastardizes idealism, and then he says, we have this Judeo-Christian based rule system, but then is he going to apply that to us?
Right. Is it just one side or is it all the sides? Right.
Was it the rule-based system when we got involved in Syria, or when we were funding the genocide in Yemen? Was it the rule-based system when we invaded in Kosovo? Was it the rule-based system when we invaded Iraq? Like, what rule-based system? Actually, the whole system is realism. It's all might makes right? It's all the power of the most powerful make the policy on that level. The problem with that is that your realism, unconstrained, has a propensity to use interest in the broadest means possible because you're responding to the incentives of being in an anarchistic system where might makes right, and the military-industrial complex and the profit-making motive of those systems. So you need a limiting principle to your realism to get to a place that's sensible in realism, at least from the perspective that's actually integrated with your other political values, whether you're a libertarian or conservative. The populist conservative new conception has been that wars are bad and they have a cost, and the people who pay the cost are mostly the people who are the constituents of the rural populists, right? People in middle America who are lower income, who sign up for the military, go to Iraq, see things they can't unsee, and then come back and are damaged for the rest of their lives, right? So he can't answer why Russia having weapons is a threat to us because he has no case for why Russia is a threat. Right. All he says is that it's good cuz, right? So he doesn't even fulfill his own promise, which is to articulate the vital national interest, because most people think of vital national interest as something that's probably much more restrained than the vision that he's been given and trying to articulate from the incentives of the more broad, realistic view.
Yeah, I mean, to me, the conflict in Ukraine and Russia, for us to be involved in that's more of an adventurous national interest, potentially, not vital as in, I see vital as we have an invasion of the borders of the United States. Like, that to me is pretty vital. Or there's, perhaps like we have going on in Russia, we have nukes put right off, the coast of the United States or something like that. Like, that's vital. That's so close to home that it has to be dealt with immediately. And it's extremely important to the continuation of the United States, right? Mm-hmm. Not necessarily what's going on around the world. But
and realism, properly understood, also understands that Russia has a realistic, anarchistic state that they're in, that they have to pursue their national interest.
Right.
So that means you have to think differently about NATO the minute you're saying I'm a realist. Because if you set up a giant incentive for Russia to push back against in its sphere of influence, then you're the one taking you should be the one taking responsibility for the conflict.
Right.
If you're not if you're increasing tensions, knowing the fact that this is how states behave, but you take no responsibility for it, you're not being a realist. Second to that, if you believe that government should be limited in all these other ways, if you think that government has perverse incentives, tends not to be connected to the thing that it's trying to, it doesn't have the knowledge to be able to make rational decisions because it's a top-down, not bottom-up system. If you think that on domestic policy, but don't integrate that with your foreign policy, you need a principle for your foreign policy to do that. And the best one for that, and this is articulated best by guys like the defense priorities and other kind of new wave of kind of bringing in realism that's more limited government orientated and more integrated with a larger limited government point of view as realism and restraint. Right, because you need a restrained vision of what the military capacities are, what restrained vision of what vital means, of what interest means, and all these other things. Without that secondary principle, you're going to have a harder time winning the fundamental debate because so much of this is driven by fear, right? So what Tim Scott was hoping for is to say, well, they have super awesome weapons, and everyone's supposed to be like, oh, well, I'm really afraid now, and so that justifies the spending.
Right. When you said that. He's listening to the wrong people on this. You're referring to like neocons generally.
Yeah, I don't know who he's listening to, but I mean, assume like, it's the DC blob.
Sure,
right?
Which would sort of tend to have this neoconservative, hawkish worldview, very much driven by the military-industrial complex and things of that nature, right?
I would assume so on the right. Like on the left, all the support of this is coming from idealists, right? They're saying we have a rules-based international order that we should comply with. The problem with the war in Iraq was that the UN wouldn't approve of it, and he violated the rules. That's at least a sensible position, right? I don't see how they apply the same thing when it comes to Syria, Libya. When Obama does it, it's a bad thing, right? Or if it's done with ground troops, that's a problem. But when it's done with special forces, it's not a problem. Or if it's done with a drone, it's not a problem according to these kind of democratic liberal idealists. And I mean that in the technical sense, idealist here. I'm not criticizing their idealism. Sure. I'm just saying in the philosophy of international relations of idealism, they're not holding true or consistent to it. And when you see a pattern of people advocating for rules to apply to everybody else but us, what you're dealing with isn't a philosophy anymore, isn't a theory anymore. What you're dealing with is a post hoc justification for your political preferred outcome. And that's what's missing in international relations at almost all times, is some lens that holds us accountable for our own actions. And that's such a high liability thing to do in politics, because as soon as you do that, you're a Putin apologist or a Saddam apologist or a bin Laden apologist or whatever. But that's what's required in order to have an actual sensible worldview in this stuff.
Right. Yeah, it's all too necessary with that worldview to have to view the United States as the inevitable good guy. We're only out doing good in the world. We can do no wrong, right? You have to do that in order to justify some of the things that we're out there doing right now.
Right, and you have to gloss over all the history, and the hand waving about Jesus is another great example there, right? Is that we have a Judeo-Christian foundation of rules, and after World War II, we set up this great world order, and it's like, well, how many millions of Iraqis would Jesus endorse us killing? Exactly. What's the number? Right? Yeah. Between a almost 30-year-long wars. I know you're saying, oh, David, the Iraq War was 20 years. No. The Iraq War started in the early 90s, and it never stopped from the Iraqi point of view. Right. But to the American public point of view, it's like, oh, we had a thing, and then nothing happened for a long time. In the middle of that, 500,000 children died of dysentery and preventable disease because of our blockade. Yeah. Keep that in mind. So to them, it's impossible to look at it from Jesus's point of view, in my view, and see, oh yeah, this is definitely the system that he would embrace. Right. Might makes right. I thought the meek inherited the earth. Right. What are we talking about here? The application of that was so politically convenient without any real reflection. How do you justify the war in Vietnam? Napalming children. And say that, oh, that's the rules-based order based on Judeo-Christianity. That's an abuse of the term Judeo-Christian ethics.
If you are a small business owner looking for exponential growth, you have to connect with Adam Thuen at Intellectual Patriots. He will revolutionize your business game and help you get to the next level. Adam can streamline your business practices and advertising strategies to improve your bottom line. His expertise in data engineering means he can build you the systems you need to collect and analyze market data. His mission is to provide you with invaluable insights to fuel your success, from grant writing and business proposals to digital systems integrations, even AI management. Intellectual Patriots is a one-stop shop for cutting-edge solutions. Don't wait another second. Visit intelpatriots.com to learn more. That's INTEL patriots.com.
With everything you're saying right there, it goes into a very James Burnham, like Machiavellian argument as well, where one of the clear incentives here, I think, especially when it comes to Ukraine and NATO expansionism, is that every country that joins NATO is forced to spend 2% of their GDP on military contracts, which is direct money into a lot of these neocons' pockets. So and all these senators and congressmen and stuff like that, they're all kind of puppets for the financial interests of the people at large, which a lot of this is the Eisenhower, beware the military industrial complex, because it's growing ever powerful after World War II. I think that there's a very clear, you put forward the noble lies, and, we have to protect Ukraine, we have to do all this stuff, we're the good guys, all these things. But at the end of the day, the people that are purporting those noble lies forward are profiting off of whatever they can extract from the decisions that are being made. Right.
There's a bootlegger and Baptist phenomena here, right? The bootlegger is the military industrial interest, and the Baptist is the liberal on Twitter saying, no, anyone who criticizes the U.S. role here is a Putin apologist.
Can you clarify what you mean by that?
Oh, during Prohibition, you had the prohibitionists, right, who are like mostly made up of women who are saying alcohol is a scourge on society and we need to get rid of it. And then you had the bootlegger who was like, great, I really love it when you say that. And they're going to adopt those point of view and advocate for those things because the bootlegger gets away with a lot more under Prohibition, right? Because now they have a monopoly in the black market.
Gotcha.
Right. So it's the same. You have people who are self-interested and people who are righteously interested, and the righteous are often abused by
the self-interested.
That makes total sense. Speaking of abuse, Mike Pence took a bit of a beating from Tucker here as well. Do we want to watch that clip?
Yeah. The clip I have queued up here is not actually, I think, the one that you're thinking of. That one wasn't in the list here.
The one where he said that what goes on inside the borders of the United States, infrastructure, the well-being of the American economy and the American people was not his concern.
Yeah, the one that I had, I was actually just scrolling through it while you guys were talking. The one I have here is actually the religious liberty one. Tucker, he criticized Mike Pence because he's supposed to be this devout religious liberty guy, right? And he went over and there was all these reports that were going on in Ukraine about how the Ukrainians were shutting down pastors and arresting pastors that were speaking out against the Ukraine government. And Mike Pence went over there and talked to them, and they said that everything was fine. So
he just took him at their word, like, we're all good here, guys. No worries.
I spoke to the arsonist, and it was quite obviously an electrical fire.
It was an accident.
Yeah, exactly. So here's a little bit of his response. We won't listen to the entire clip, but here's a little bit of his response here.
Of America to continue to give the Ukrainian military the resources that they need to repel the Russian invasion and restore their sovereignty.
Would you, may I ask, would you be, and I believe you have a good faith position on this, and we have disagreements on it, but I want to just, I can't let you elide over the question of the treatment of Christians.
I know, I heard
and
that
would
again.
you be, well, no, but hold on, would you be
Problem is, you don't accept my answer. I just told you that I asked the religious leader in Kiev if it was happening. You asked me if I raised the issue, and I did.
And I'm saying
I also raised it with the Ukrainians, and I was told that there are religious leaders who have been working with the Russian military that is murdering people by the thousands.
Okay.
I mean, Tucker, look.
Wait, but hold on. Don't you think...
Let me explain to you what I think our national interest is there.
I would think you would have greater concern for religious liberty in Ukraine. And I'm surprised
I told you I raised the issue of religious liberty.
No, you spoke to one person who's clearly on one side of it, and there are many, many news reports that are not disputed by anybody that many clergy have been arrested in Ukraine. And I'm merely saying, I may not agree with their views. I'm not Russian Orthodox, but you can't arrest clergy for having different views, period. Because if you do, you violate the basic tenet of religious liberty.
I want to be clear with you. I won't stand by it. I won't stand for it. If people are being persecuted for their religious beliefs, I won't stand for it. In any country with which the country of our nation is supporting or our allies are supporting.
Yes.
Period. Paragraph.
Yeah, he really did call him on the carpet there. I mean, talking to one guy and calling it, okay, well, things are good is not really exactly doing your due diligence if this is something that you really purport to care about a lot.
Yeah, I don't know enough about the individual story of religious persecution. One of the things I think is missing there is the Orthodox Church is different than a lot of other Christian churches in terms of its structure. A lot of it has like a Ukrainian church, a Russian church, a Polish church, and like it's a different structure. So I don't know enough about it to be able to comment on it. Other than that, I think it's an interesting question that someone needs to ask, which is association with the Russian Orthodox Church enough of a association to justify persecution if the Russians are invading your country? And,
right.
And I don't know. Like if you're giving active military intelligence to the enemy, it seems like, well, you're now a combatant, right?
Well, and that's a different story. That's no longer
that's what
clergy
Pence suggests, right?
Sure. So I mean, there's certainly like facts to be found there,
right?
Right.
But that's like a fact and maybe a case. But is that all these cases? Right? How many cases are there? I don't know enough about that to comment that. But I do think a dose of skepticism. It feels like a manipulation to say, well, it's a problem, but. But I talked to a guy and he said it was okay. I just will never forget. One time I passed a bill and it was the campus free speech bill and the governor vetoed it. And his signing letter said, I talked to the universities about the free speech problem on universities and they said there wasn't a problem. So he vetoed the bill. And I just remember thinking, it's just like, you're asking the fox how secure the hen house is, man. Like, come on. You didn't pick that up in your own letter, much less exactly here, right? If you're asking Ukrainian officials about whether or not they are persecuting minorities, especially when we know that they've shut down media organizations that are hostile in there. We know that they're suspending democracy for another election year, right?
Because Zelensky said, when asked, will there be elections? He said, well, if the conflict is over, there will be.
Yeah.
But basically implying if the conflict isn't over, there probably won't be, right? Which is kind of crazy. We're over there fighting for democracy. We're backing Ukraine to defend their democracy, and yet it has actually also been suspended.
Democracy is another one of those magic words. Like it's a spell that you use to cast on people so that they just start to do your bidding. It's like we're defending good. Democracy equals good.
Yeah.
Everything
actually,
bad equals fascism. We fight bad, we fight for good, right?
Right.
It's all just like, it's wizardry.
It's important to note too that is constitutional there, right? They have a provision in their constitution to suspend during a foreign conflict elections.
Okay.
So it's not like he's doing something extrajudicial. But it is concerning that, and that's one of the preciousness, part of the preciousness of the American Constitution is how rigid it is because it's a first draft, right? Because it was like the first attempt at a government truly restrained by a constitution in this way with separation of powers and all these ways. Now you can go back and there are some proto versions of it, but it's most complete first draft. And the First Amendment can't be suspended during a war. The Wilson administration tried. They failed. FDR tried and failed. Habeas corpus has been suspended multiple times. And repeatedly, it keeps coming back as suspension, right? Bush suspended it. I'm not actually exactly clear if we still have habeas corpus technically in the United States. So it's one of those things that because it's not specifically articulated in the Constitution, there are all kinds of ways that the Constitution's limited. It It didn't stop the stupid fire in a crowded theater argument from actually being decided by the Supreme Court, right?
Right.
And that was, to everyone recall, that was because of protests in World War I.
Right.
They said saying, hey, I don't think World War I's a great idea is the same as shouting fire in a crowded theater. And that's not protection.
And it was extremely unpopular at the time too, which is very important. Is like everybody likes to think that in World War I and World War II were like these popular endeavors that we went and that we're supposed to go embark on. But the populace did not want to do this. And people that were complaining about the draft, they were thrown in prison by the Wilson administration because of this decision right here. But
it was ultimately like the First Amendment over the long run, because it's such a firm part of the document, it has slowly eroded away from that standard. And we just don't have that same kind of standard when it comes to other sorts of components of the rights. And those are the limitations that we currently have when it comes to our big government, our big state. And Ukraine doesn't have that. And no, neither does, New Zealand or, Canada. Canada. Great story from last week. It's not on the notes, but just this guy, it's great at viral video. He goes on and this guy shows up. He's like, well, it sounds like you've been criticizing Mr. Trudeau. And he's just like, oh, well, it's my right. I'm on Facebook and I'm saying what I'm going to say. And it's like, well, you can't be doing that, you see. And he's just like, well, I'm going to just keep doing it. So it's like, well, you're going to come by. We're going to have to come by again. He's just like, well, I hope you bring some coffee next time. They're just.
And this is like Royal Canadian Mounted Police, like standing at his door, right? And he's like, well, sorry.
He said something like, I hope Trudeau's like hung for treason or something like that. Something that's obviously protected in the United States Constitution, but not protected in Canada.
Yeah. Well, and it goes to show too. I mean, we should be cautioned from projecting the expectations that we have of our own government and our own country on other countries, because as you mentioned with Ukraine, they don't have the same protections that we do or the same, limitation of government perhaps. And so it is tough. You do have to guard yourself against viewing some of these things through our own sort of nationalistic lens of like, oh, well, they should do it like we do it because that's the way we do it. Like every country's different and they have different priorities and different systems.
Yeah. It's both and, right? So you recognize that while holding your standard to your moral compass.
100%.
Right? So it's perfectly fine for me to say, yeah, I get it. Our free speech tradition comes from Britain, but they never wrote it down hard enough. Right. So like I can both recognize that that free speech standard does come from Britain and the Dutch and that Anglosphere, while also recognizing that Count Dankula shouldn't go to prison for teaching his dog how to do a Nazi salute. Like these are I can hold both standards at the same time.
I have so many questions. I don't know who Count Dankula is.
You don't remember the story?
No.
Oh, it's such a great story.
Count Dankula is just he's like a memer guy, like a Twitter meme guy. And back during the 2016 election, or was it during the 2020 election?
Something like it was early. It's been a while.
Yeah, it's been quite a while. I believe it was the 2016 election. he taught his dog to do a Nazi salute as a joke. And
well, it wasn't even his dog. It was his girlfriend's dog while she was on vacation. So she leaves the dog with him while he's gone. He teaches it.
And he's like a comedian guy.
Yeah, he's a comedian. He did it for a joke. And he got in real trouble for it. Lost all of his stuff and had to serve time.
Lost his Twitter account. Yeah. Rough day for a meme lord.
Yeah, what's he gonna do? That's like depriving him of his whole livelihood.
Yeah, he's back now.
Yeah.
Thanks, Elon.
Well, obviously, because Elon's a Nazi, right? So he would.
But I think that this broader conversation here goes into a deeper combo that we all wanted to have, which was that I think Liam McCullum, who's done a lot of the good reporting on that event where Tucker was at, friend of ours, fellow Montanan here. He said this in a tweet, and I really like the way that he phrased it, was that the right is reclaiming its old anti-war heritage. And I think that's a very critical thing because most people don't realize how anti-war the right used to be in history. It's actually kind of a recent phenomenon that the right kind of became these war hawks, like only a few decades really. And now it's like that populist energy is like converting the right wing back to their old roots of what they were. And I don't even think right wingers understand their history, let alone anybody else.
Well,
right?
let's go into it. What is the anti-war history of the American right?
Well, the Fire in a Crowded Theater is one of them.
Yeah.
Like that was largely aimed at right wingers.
Really?
Yeah. Right wingers were the anti-interventionist crowd.
Yeah. So it's important to understand that if you've heard the term isolationist, that was a term invented by, I'm not joking here, you can look it up, the Council on Foreign Relations. It's invented by think tanks to describe a position that almost everybody held, but they didn't believe was a sustainable standard after World War I.
Similar to how the term conspiracy theorist was invented to describe people who didn't believe that JFK was shot by a lone gunman.
Yeah, it's a term that started populating during the 60s.
Interesting.
It's a term of art, right? It's a term specifically to try to describe a phenomena, and it's not. It's actually not being conspiratorial. Language is an emergent phenomena where people coin new words.
Yeah.
Right. So this is just what it is. So before,
but it can be weaponized.
Yes, and it definitely was in the case of before anti-interventionist. And no one's ever said I'm an isolationist. This was all anti-interventionism, meaning America has a special place in the world, being where we're at, to preserve freedom. We shouldn't go abroad looking for monsters to slay. Right. I'm quoting a founder. I can't remember which one. Thomas Jefferson?
Might be Jefferson.
Yeah.
Foreign Entanglements is Washington, I believe. Monsters is Jefferson.
I actually might be doing Adams. Anyways, the whole point is
they all look the same. Okay.
This tradition was the mainstay of American foreign policy, with a couple deviations, Barbary Pirates and stuff like that, War of 1812, stuff like that, between the founding and World War I. Where most of like what was going on in Europe was Europe's business, was going on in Asia was Asia's business. We're going to stay here and focus on us. Between the progressive era and World War I, you had the rise of the center-right progressives. Think Roosevelt, the big guy with the gut and the guns, that Roosevelt. Teddy Roosevelt.
Teddy.
You think him, and you think this guy was going around saying for his entire career, if we want to be a great nation, we have to have a great Navy. He read a history book, and and the history book convinced him, so that's what he did. And he helped trying to build up the case for an American empire. We invaded Cuba, took over Cuba, Hawaii, the Philippines, Indonesia, all over all of these areas. A time of expansion happened from the kind of the top elite, right? This isn't something that got down to the normal everyday people. This was something that was very much in the elite sphere, this expansion of American imperial aspirations, as everyone was being imperial. A whole faction of progressive Republican types, and Democrats too, decided that America needed to join the empire game at that time, but it wasn't popular amongst the base, like the crowd, right?
So the motivation for it was, well, everyone else is doing it, so we should too.
Yeah, that's
it wasn't.
Not
we're going to defend democracy. We're not going to liberate people. It's just, well, everyone's doing it.
This is Empire 1.0.
Although Woodrow Wilson did very much have a God complex. Like he very much believed that we need to reshape the world in our image. Like these are that's like basically a direct quote.
Another
like the idea of the soul of the nation, like these like religious religious terminologies comes out of that progressive era during this time.
Very much so. And tied with eugenics and also tied with idealism, right? International idealism, meaning what we need is the League of Nations in order to bind countries and to create rules so that we have a rules-based international order. Like that's Woodrow Wilson. That's the progressive era, right? So in that time frame, there was still a tremendous amount of resistance in World War I to the entrance of America, led by figures like Senator Robert A. Taft. Now, you're thinking Taft, you're thinking the president. This isn't the president. This is a relation to him. Robert A. Taft, who was just a senator. He got up to as high as majority leader in the Senate, I believe. But he was never president. This guy, he ran for president and failed. But he was probably the best articulator of that. That combination of limited government, Calvin Coolidge like, we need a gold or silver based standard, opposition to the Fed, opposition to foreign entanglements, opposition to regulation and cartels and stuff like that. So Robert A. Taft he wasn't perfect. He was a politician, but he kind of had like the mainstays of what we would articulate today as like a libertarian-esque position. If you read Murray Rothbard's The Old Right, what he articulates is that at that time from the 1930s, or as the World War II happened and the attacks on Hawaii happened, a major sentiment change happened with the American public, where all of a sudden it was like, okay, we tried to leave Europe alone, but they wouldn't leave us alone. So the CFR and all these organizations, and there's another great book I will drop.
I believe it's The Betrayal of the American Right.
Betrayal of the American Right. Yeah, that's right. That's right. Yeah, sorry.
By Rothbard?
By Rothbard.
Cool. Yeah, I think The Old Right is just the article form of it.
I think that's Garrett that wrote that.
Oh, you might be right. Yeah, so anyways, with that, there was a change in sentiment amongst the broad public where you had this beat 'em up term, isolationist. If you articulated old right ideas, you were an isolationist. And it's really important to say that for a very long time, non-interventionism was the mainstay of right-wing politics, meaning politics that were comfortable with hierarchy, comfortable with unequal results in and there's obviously, it gets a little difficult when you talk about the parties, right? Because the Democrat Party was more so this way at one point, and then you had the National Party, and then the Republicans changed substantially under Lincoln. And there's all kinds of different, and then you're also dealing with people. So there's all kinds of imperfect implications of these things, right?
Sure.
So but in this critical time period, what we're talking about when we mean the old right is that interwar period, till just before World War I to after World War II. And then objection to FDRism, right? That was another key mainstay. You were both anti-war during World War I. Trying to hold on to an anti-war brand during World War II was very difficult. So most people went very low key. And then, but you were opposed to FDR's, great, what was a New Deal policies. And that was Taft's legacy, right? And as he goes out, unfortunately, kind of the old right dies with him. There just wasn't really, in the post-war consensus, that's the betrayal of the old right is the National Review, Bill Buckley, and other figures
James
like
Burnham,
that. James Burnham.
Who we've talked about a lot on the podcast, you and me.
Yeah. The neocons come in, kind of. These folks came in and kind of pulled up a more of an intellectual conservative elite that then start to say, hey, if you're a non-interventionist, you're out. You're an isolationist. You're not part of our group.
It's worth noting, so James Burnham really is like the key figure here, and he's like one of the most important people in the 20th century, especially when it comes to the right, that nobody knows who he is. His books are some things that if you want to understand politics, you should read James Burnham. Like descriptively, he understands politics. It's like reading Machiavelli. Like it's just, this is just what politics is. So James Burnham is this, he was mentored by Trotsky, essentially. So and a lot of these neocon types, they come out of the old communism. They're like communists, like they reverted from communism. They developed a deep hatred of communism during the Cold War era, but they come out of the Trotsky wing of communism, essentially. So you have James Burnham, who's the CIA guy, important note, and Rothbard talks about this in The Betrayal of the American Right, and he mentors Buckley, who was also a CIA guy, important, and they form the National Review together. And the National Review became this kind of standard bearer that limits the Overton window. And they would, like, if you were anything more radical than Milton Friedman, you're not allowed in, basically. Like Milton, like he is the margin of the Overton window.
And the National Review is a publication. Right?
Mm-hmm.
Putting out ideas, policy ideas and stuff like that.
Yeah. So, and that's where you end up having Ayn Rand gets kicked out, big champion against the Soviet Union, right? She's the person that went to Congress and was talking about, her experiences. We kind of covered that when talking about Michael Malice's book. That was the first chapter in that book. And then people like Murray Rothbard got kicked out. And that's why he ended up going and working with some anti-war left-wingers basically after this, because he got kicked out of the right during this time. So you end up having Buckley becomes the person that sets the tone of how far you can actually be in here. And in Buckley and James Burnham's mind, it's you got to be a war hawk against the Soviet Union during the Cold War. That becomes the new standard. And, normal people are sheep. They just kind of go along with it, right? Like they become the intellectual elites at this time.
So the National Review shifts the Overton window. All of a sudden, the more mainstream conservative viewpoint is we have to be hawkish. We have to be, against the Soviet Union. And then does the left sort of assume the role of sort of the anti-war party? Or because, a lot of people, I think when they think anti-war, my brain innately goes to the 60s, the hippie movement, being against Vietnam. And that was very much, in my mind, it's tied to the left. Is that part of that?
I think
momentum?
An important thing, and this is actually just peeling back a little bit deeper history on the left, is the left also had a moment like this where it gauged the opinion. So there was a guy during the Woodrow Wilson era and that progressive era, there was a guy named Randolph Bourne at that time. And so the progressives had this clique. Where it was like Wilson, it was like John Dewey, who's like the big education reform guy, and there's like all these writers in here. They're like these left-wing progressive type writers, and there was this guy Randolph Bourne that was part of that clique. He was a cripple, and he wrote an essay called "War is the Health of the State" because he was not liking the direction that all of his fellows were going here, and he wrote this big essay that was a scathing report basically saying that the state feeds on war. It's how you keep this entire illusion going. And as soon as he dropped that, their entire clique was like, you're not allowed in the club anymore. They started writing hit pieces on him saying that he's a cripple, like he's like a terrible person. It's very like eugenicist of like his ideas are like his body. They're not fully formed. Like they would say things like that. Right.
Damn.
So it's like, once you get out of the margin, you get kicked out as well. So like the left had that. And then the right kind of did the same thing like 50 years later, basically. So I think that there ended up becoming this populist movement that resulted in like the hippie, the anti-Vietnam intervention stuff that kind of came in that 60s time frame, which I think also JFK rose through.
True.
Like he kind of rose through that energy. In the same way that RFK is doing that now.
Right. That's fair.
But interestingly, in a more hawkish stance, like JFK rose up as a pro-Soviet conflict person, right?
Yeah.
Now, he didn't govern quite that way. Like, for example, the Cuban Missile Crisis. He pulled missiles out of Turkey rather than continuing the crisis in Cuba. But it was, and then he had limited interactions in Vietnam, but he wasn't the great amplifier of that. It was his predecessors. But I think you're right. It was a kind of a consolidation moment, and then like an expansion moment happened after the fall of the Berlin Wall and peace with Russia. Once that happened, there was no longer this forcing function for the right to stay the way it was. So then you had, basically the left going, interestingly, anti-war during Bush 1 and then pro-war during Kosovo. And then like it's become like this partisan thing that is actually, not unique, but a moment in the 90s. And then by the 2000s, you have the war in Iraq, basically consolidate after 9/11, the consolidation of pro-war neoconservative republicanism in their control for about 10 years till 2010. And then you have the Tea Party rise up with a lot of different people coming in with the Tea Party. The rise of Ron Paul makes a huge difference in that. An re-articulation of, in defense of non-interventionism, that all of a sudden takes a whole bunch of people by surprise, right? Ron Paul gets up there in front of South Carolina in the presidential primary debates in 2008 and says, hey guys, we should treat other countries the way we want to be treated, basically articulating Jesus's golden rule far better than Tim Scott just did, as applied to international relations, that we should treat others as they would treat us, and we would have them treat us. And he got booed. right?
Yeah, that was a moment. I remember that.
And you tension that moment with that moment we just saw with Tim Scott. Right?
Yeah.
That's the change that Liam's talking about. He's saying there's something going on with the baseline, the fundamental, like the larger population of conservatives on thinking about foreign intervention, that there was some lesson of 20 years of war in Iraq and Afghanistan that made them say, something about Obama getting into twice as many wars as Bush, and then Trump being the only president that didn't get us involved in a new foreign conflict, although he didn't do a very good job ending them.
Yeah.
That has changed. And then additionally, Trump basically coming in saying Iraq it's okay to say Iraq was a huge mistake and you elites all manipulated us and lied to us. And that put a bunch of people off the hook, because then they could say, this person that I admire has that opinion, so I can adopt that opinion with integrity.
Mm-hmm. Do you think this is a moment where political leaders who are taking part in town halls like this and in interviews like this have to be aware of the fact that they need an army to lead, and are really questioning, okay, who am I working for? Who am I beholden to? Where does the power lie? Is it with the people who are shifting kind of behind me and realizing maybe this interventionist foreign policy that we've had for the last 30 years hasn't worked out so well. Maybe we should adjust that, versus perhaps some of the financial interests and the special interests that are funding these campaigns on the other side saying, oh, no, we want these things. Yeah. Do you think this is a moment where they're really having to weigh who they're working for and where the power is?
Yeah. And there's always a contrast in a campaign between I need money to get my message out, right? I don't want to be beholden to people, right? In general, I think most politicians are actually in that. They want to vote the way they want to vote. They're not empty vessels, but most of them have ideas about how the world ought to work. Mm-hmm. And they're listening to people and being persuaded, right? And then there's the other one of what's the read on the general population, what's going to get me elected, right? They have to do both at the end of the day. So
assuming they think that it's the general public that gets them elected, I think is the problem.
Well, it's more like if I don't have money, I can't tell the general public who I am and I won't get elected. And also, what values do they hold so that I can sell myself to them?
So herein lies a huge catch-22. If the military-industrial complex is as wealthy as it is and as influential as it is in Washington, how do you get the money you need to tell your story and not sell your soul in the process?
You got to get everyday people to give. That's the difference maker, right? If you can get everyday people to donate the amount that they can, and that's the thing that frustrates me is you got really good people running all the time, right? Who, I know the being jaded on politics is very trendy in a lot of circles, but the only way I can see that you get to a better place is by getting better at filtering who's who believes what, by asking better questions and holding people accountable. And I think you can, and then additionally, when you find somebody good, damn it, write a check, right? I mean, like it's just $2,500 at a time, right? That's how you run for office. So people who find that good person, who agrees with their philosophy, who sees the world they do, you got to get out there and support them. And I know people are like, oh, I don't have enough money for that yet. We'll send them $20. I mean, even that matters.
Yeah.
Because the more small dollar donations you have, the more you can pitch that to larger groups of people, right? And especially, there are lots of other interests that aren't the military industrial complex. They're a major player, but they're not the only one, right? And you can find it another place. If the Club for Growth does not have a foreign policy, right? So you go to them and you work with them. If you go to other groups, even in the Trump world, you go to them and you can fundraise. I mean, there's all kinds of opportunities to go around those things if you're not willing to engage in that.
One of the interesting things is I was very interested with Vivek Ramaswamy's new campaign thing. He's basically setting up this, like, you contribute, like you can go and get a link, and if somebody donates through your link, you get like a portion of that back, kind of a thing. So like, he's basically like recruiting influencers and stuff like that to come get your donation link with me, and you get like 10% of the donation back to you, kind of like it's a referral program. It's like Amazon referrals type of a thing, right?
Huh, that's innovative.
Which is kind of interesting.
Wow, that's super
and
innovative.
it's one of those things where at first when I heard it, I was like, I feel like there's some campaign finance
I know, I was like,
thing that
can't
exists
be
there.
legal.
But I mean, I'm sure he has lawyers that have looked through this stuff. But then secondly, I was like, I can't believe nobody's ever done this before. Like, I'm not aware of this happening, something like this. But it is one of those things where first millennial running kind of a thing. It's probably a little bit more savvy with the internet trends.
Sure.
And like it makes a lot of sense.
Keep in mind, the biggest internet fundraiser of all time before Barack Obama was Ron Paul. right? And that was low dollar donations, right? Just lots of people saying, I believe in this person, I want to give to them. So
$20.12 a month.
It is possible.
Well, and I think we are seeing the rise of these new style of candidates, and Trump, I think, was maybe the beginnings of that. But we're seeing it on the left. We're seeing it with RFK, and on the right now, we're seeing it with Vivek Ramaswamy. Is like they're both people that I'm doubtful they're going to win their primaries respectively, but they are making enough of a splash where they're like forcing change in national conversation when it comes to these debates. Like I can't wait for the Republican debate to see Vivek against all of these old school politicians. Like I'm assuming Trump's not going to show up because that seems to be the angle, and it's just going to be Vivek being able to just dismantle all of these guys because he's so much smarter and understands these things way better than they do. And it's going to be very fun to watch.
I'm really digging your Vivek fanboyism. It's awesome.
I like the guy. Well, no,
I like him too.
So I read his book Woke Inc. and he's the first person in political life at all that I think understands at all the money managers when it comes to like the ESG stuff. He's the only person in any political sphere that I've actually seen that actually understands what's going on with that, which gives me a tremendous amount of respect for him.
Wow.
Like no political person has been able to describe it accurately, in my opinion.
Not easy to earn. Kyle's respect.
Yeah.
Got it.
Yeah. It's very difficult to earn my respect on the political stuff. And RFK's earned my respect too. Like he's somebody that's I wouldn't be normally on the Democrat side, but if more Democrats were like him, I'd be very happy with the state of the country. If he was like the standard Democrat,
for sure,
very happy with that.
Well, and again, I think this is that moment to for him to become that sort of beacon for folks to kind of flock back to a classical Democrat position on some of these issues.
Well,
right?
and it's going to be fun watching how the superdelegates in the Democratic primary completely screw him over, and watching the red pill nature of people seeing how cheated people get in these elections.
Yeah.
And play that clip back when it happens and we'll see.
All the Bernie guys are out there. They're like the meme with the news, like first time, huh? Yeah.
Well, there is an interesting thing when we're talking about political realignments and stuff. Like there's a large swath of voters that were like Ron Paul to Bernie Sanders to Trump to RFK to and on paper, if you're just like a standard political science guy, like that shouldn't make sense. But like if you understand the dynamic of where politics is trending right now, I think it makes a lot of sense because like going from Ron Paul to Bernie Sanders, those are such polar opposites politically speaking. But if you're looking at it from a right to left paradigm, like you're not understanding where politics is forming now. Like it's much more of a top down rather than a left right.
Yeah, it's on a different axis
spectrum.
entirely.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's very true. It's a very interesting insight. I look forward to playing that back. Vivek is earning your respect in another way as well, right? He recently had some comments regarding Ross Ulbricht. Do you want to dig into that real quick?
Yeah. Michael Malice interviewed Vivek a few months ago, and he was asking him, like, would you pardon this person, that person? It was people like Julian Assange, Edward Snowden, and then Ross Ulbricht. Vivek didn't know about the Ross Ulbricht case. And Ross Ulbricht, for people that don't know, he was the orchestrator of the Silk Road, which was kind of like a dark web website that was like a truly black market, free market. And he got caught. He got sentenced 2 life sentences to prison for allegedly hiring like hitmen kind of a thing.
Directly or just facilitating the purchase of that sort of thing?
Very unclear. Like it's very unclear. But that seems not to be true from all the evidence that I've
functionally
seen.
running the website was the real crime. It was the fact that he had a website where you could do things that you're not.
But they hit him with the hitman stuff. I believe that's what the case was. It was trying to like orchestrate murders. I believe that's what the final charges ended up being.
Which we're talking about like just some kid from like middle America, suburban, whatever, young guy, like not some sort of Russian warlord or anything.
Young
right?
libertarian, Rothbardian, Misesian guy. Like he was kind of like our camp, right? Yeah. When it comes to actual politics. But yeah, he got hit several years ago. It was a place where you could accept Bitcoin, and it was all these things. It was like the early days of Bitcoin, that type of stuff. He got hit with two double life sentences. I think wrongly, and I think a lot of people in our sphere believe wrongly. A lot of people in the Bitcoin sphere believe wrongly. But anyways, Vivek Ramaswamy didn't understand the case. He didn't know about the case. But he went and looked into it, and he went and met with Ross's mother, all this stuff. And he came out saying that day one, he would pardon Ross, which I think is the correct decision. So like, much respect for him in that regard of going in, doing research, understanding that I don't understand something, and then coming back with a clear decision. Like, I like that. I like the natural curiosity that guys like him and guys like RFK are putting forward. Like, they're very willing to say, like, I don't know about that. And then they go and research it, and then they come back with a decision on what they think.
There's something that's really
refreshing.
Yes, refreshing and sort of trustworthy about someone who's willing to tell you what they do and don't know, especially what they don't know, and say, I'll get back to you on that, and actually go and do the research, do the work, figure it out, and come back with an answer. That's, to me, that's feels a little bit novel in the political space, where we're so used to looking to leaders to tell us that they have the answer for everything and that they can just guide us to the promised land or whatever. It seems a little more entrepreneurial. It seems a little bit more youthful to be able to say, I don't actually have the answer to that, but I'm going to go find out. And I think that's maybe a product of this new style of candidate that we're seeing that's able to do that confidently and still maintain people's trust. It feels like a different dynamic to me.
Yeah. I mean, imagine if, what was the guy, Aleppo? Or what if he just said, I don't know about Aleppo? And then it said,
Gary
it's a
Johnson.
country in Syria. And then he would have been like, okay.
Yeah, exactly.
Instead of saying, what's Aleppo? Or like you should know or something.
Right. Yeah, so specifically, Ross was convicted of engaging in continual criminal enterprise, distributing narcotics by means of the internet, which I guess are separate charges, conspiracy to distribute narcotics, conspiracy to commit money laundering, conspiracy to traffic fraudulent identity documents, and conspiracy to commit computer hacking. So I guess, maybe the hitman thing did not get put in the court.
Yeah, but basically, conspiracy to run a website. Like, that's the problem, is he ran a website where people did bad things. Section 230 doesn't protect that, apparently.
Apparently not.
Yeah, and now he's sitting in a prison in Arizona, and it's not looking good from everything I've heard. So,
what do you mean not looking good?
My understanding of the people that get into prison and are in these heavy life sentences, they get into a very specific division in these prisons that are like the top level security, and it's just, that's where all like the lawlessness inside of prisons happen, where everybody kind of separates into like, you're on the white club, you're on the black club, you're on the Asian club. There's not a lot of Asians in prison. That's that's not the right one.
I believe they call them gangs, not clubs. It's a little less like debate.
So it's all the same thing.
A little weird when you say club.
But like, I heard rumors of like, he was basically given a shank and was like, in order to be in our club and in our gang, you have to go shank a guy, and he wouldn't do it. Ooh. And now he's like and then he got moved, and it's like this whole thing. So like, things aren't good for him. Like,
that's tragic, because I mean, really at the end of the day, like what he did was, I think you could say, a victimless crime, right? Unless you can directly tie murders to, his website or what have you. And I don't know if you can. I don't have all the information on that, so I could be wrong. But it's really tragic when someone who does go to jail for something that didn't harm anyone else gets put into that situation where they have to become a criminal when they weren't before, right? In order to survive.
Yeah, and especially for the crime of, I created a website where you can sell anything. And maybe he didn't think of the implications, right? I mean, he was also a very young man at the time. And so a double life sentence is so out of proportion with, I think, the injustice at hand. I mean, maybe there should be a crime. Maybe you should have to take down the website. I'm open to that, but geez.
Yeah, he was arrested when he was 29.
Yeah,
so.
it's
I mean,
kind of
give
ridiculous.
him 1 million hours of community service or something.
Yeah.
But like, really, supermax prison?
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah. Especially when you got Hunter Biden literally saying prostitutes are a business expense, and he's going to get charged with a slap on the wrist. We had the IRS Whistleblowers Committee and the House Oversight Committee hearing just the other day a couple facts that I just want to make sure it gets like hammered in, because our goal is to inform you, is to help you get equipped with what's going on. Number one, the tax problems we're talking about here go all the way back to 2018. Really critical. The whistleblowers are saying that they concealed content of the Hunter Biden's laptop from IRS investigators, so that the DOJ was saying you can't use the Hunter Biden's laptop in your IRS investigation into Hunter Biden. Specifically, the sitting next to my father WhatsApp message. That's big, right? Because that has to do with payments and his taxable income on those payments. Second, another part. The investigation was slow walked. They could have been raiding his house as early as April 2020. Now, what else happened in the year of 2020?
Just so happens there was an election that year.
Specifically, it was delayed to avoid optics and then never pursued at all. Next, the prosecutors forbid investigators from asking questions about, quote, the big guy referenced in the messages. And let's put all this money into context. This is $17 million of income from China, Romania, and Ukraine.
What?
So the shell company's component of it is substantial. The whistleblower claims that a special investigator is needed. And it confirms the accusation that Hunter Biden was, used prostitutes and sex clubs as a tax write-off, which is never not going to be funny. And then also it definitely confirms what we've been talking about when it comes to that there's influence peddling going on, that he's trying to hide money. And part of once you start hiding money, it then becomes easy. I can get away with this. You get away with this all these years, and all of a sudden you start basically filing your taxes wrong because you feel like you're feeling invincible and you can get away with anything.
Is that dues and subscriptions? The hookers and is that where you file that on your expenses?
I'm telling you, it's networking. Right?
Oh, yeah, it's all a networking event.
It's advertising expense.
Yeah, the
meals and entertainment. That's what it is. That's what it is. Yeah. I just need to keep that for later.
I started this small business, and I'm literally like killing myself, tying myself in the knots, trying to figure out what I can and can't deduct. And this guy is just like, sex club. Obviously, it's the same thing as a golf club.
It's a country club.
It's a country club. It's just like, man. Killing me.
Man.
So the Democrats have been saying, well, the guy in charge here was appointed under Trump, therefore this is all political theater. But the whistleblowers very specifically in their introduction address this. They say that even the special prosecutor from Delaware had to get permission functionally from the DOJ and federal prosecutors who hamstrung the mission. In fact, he says that he was in a meeting where the last straw was where he was in a meeting, and the person who's supposed to be in charge that they're appointing to as a Trump appointee said to the group that he was not in charge and couldn't make the final decision on the charges being brought to Hunter Biden after all this time.
The question that raises in my mind is, if he wasn't in charge as the lead prosecutor, who is?
Well, what the whistleblower says is the DOJ and federal prosecutors.
Someone above him is saying,
yeah.
Don't.
And this is what we mean by the deep state, is that even if your lead guy is part of the other party, he doesn't have full authority. And there's a huge network effect at play when you have all these permanent bureaucrats who are able to get entrenched and never be fired and always have to be in. And don't get me wrong, like the patronage system isn't a lot better, right? The system we had before Woodrow Wilson, where it's like every 4 years, everyone got fired and a whole new crew had to take over and learn the job. I'm not saying that's superior, but there's definitely also a problem here. Maybe we should just limit the power of government.
Hey, I mean, that seems pretty reasonable. So I just want to go back over these facts really quick just to make sure that I got them. So the tax problems preceded Joe Biden's presidency. Mm-hmm. They go back to 2018 during Trump's presidency. Now, the investigators, or excuse me, the IRS investigation was inhibited. Could have happened as early as April 2020, but that was during election season, heart of election season, and they knew that Hunter Biden's problems being aired publicly were going to absolutely damage Joe Biden's chances of winning the election, right? And that to me is like a really, really key piece.
Oh yeah, I mean it seems like such a, if you're just looking at the incentives and the strange coincidence at play of saying in April of 2020 they can't execute a search warrant because of optics, so they put it off till after the election, and then they never get around to it.
Convenient.
Yeah, that's tough, man. It's tough to say that that's just equal justice, right? One of the things that they do in the committee hearing, and maybe we won't listen to it because it's all pretty long.
Yeah,
is just the how well they do at articulating that equal justice means everyone's treated the same. It doesn't matter that you're the president's son; everyone's treated the same. And so at the end of the day, We need a system that does not allow for some families to get favorable treatment. And it is a miscarriage of justice.
100%.
So.
It's also worth remembering that all this stuff with Hunter Biden and Ukraine is the reason why Trump got impeached. Remember, like it was for the Ukrainian government looking into some of these details in Ukraine. Like it was, Trump was allegedly coercing Zelensky when it came to like a weapons deal, if I remember right. And it was a quid pro quo of give me information about Hunter Biden and all of his dealings in Ukraine. Like it is worth remembering is like this is the original reason that Trump got impeached.
He was sniffing around and they were like,
about it.
I don't know about that. Better just turn the tables.
Yeah. So it is interesting how the tables turned in that regard.
Definitely.
And this was all before the Ukraine war. It was all a year before that, or 2 years before that. But yeah.
Speaking of Ukraine, they're getting cluster bombs. It looks like, right?
Cluster bombs are being deployed to southern Ukraine.
I want to call back to an earlier episode of this show, and I want to point out we've only been doing this since January. I think this is going to be our 25th episode. So hey, congratulations, guys! 25.
Yay!
It's somewhat of an important number. Okay,
it's a quarter of 100.
I remember it's a quarter of 100. I remember maybe it was very early on in this show where we were talking about just money. There had not been any weapons given yet. Do you remember that? Not so long ago.
Like a fairy dream.
I know, right? And then we've gone from that to strategic weapons, defensive weapons, tanks, fighters, and now cluster munitions, which are generally agreed upon by most civilized countries, but not the United States, correct me if I'm wrong, as basically unethical to use because they produce such collateral damage, because these things stick around the battlefields for long after the conflict is over and they end up maiming innocent people.
And explode in a very wide range area.
And just cause a tremendous amount of damage.
It's not tactical in the very loose frame that we use it when we talk about missiles.
Right.
So we recognize, everyone knows that it's immoral to use this. The only difference is that the left has decided, and certain members of the right has decided, that because Russia has deployed similar weapons, that therefore we should.
They're doing it, so we should too.
Yep. That's the moral framework we're talking about here. The moral justification of a 6-year-old saying, well, he got to do it, so therefore I should. And that's what would every parent tell their 6-year-old when they say, well, he did it to me.
That doesn't justify your actions.
Yeah, exactly.
That's what they say.
It's just like, this is devoid of moral thinking, I'm afraid.
One take that I've heard on this, and I believe it's from the All In Pod, was that this is all we have left to give.
Yeah, that was the David Sachs argument.
Yeah, that our stockpiles have been so depleted by what we've already given. We end up asking other countries like South Korea if like we can have some of theirs, and they're like, no, you're going to give them Ukraine. Like, you can't have them.
Well, we're like,
and now all we got is this. We're like, well, we got this crazy shit. You can have that.
Well, that was the point. Like that was like the little debate between Jason and David on the All In podcast was essentially that we're out of ammo.
Yeah.
Which and I think there's like a broader conversation that goes here is like we have like an $800 billion military budget. How are we out of ammo?
Yeah.
Right.
Well, and also interesting, the figures around how long it's going to take to replenish that should we need it for vital interests, right?
Well, there's just like a certain thing too of like how inefficient is our military industrial complex right now to the point where like what is the reason? I'm not sure what the reasoning is behind this because it can't be just that we've just like, I don't know, like, are our production lines not good enough to be producing what is happening?
Well, we shipped all of our production overseas and now we don't have any production here, right?
I don't know if that's true when it comes to arms manufacturing. I think America still makes a lot of
I'm sure we don't because that would be a total national security risk.
I'm pretty sure that's all going down in like Arizona right now.
Yeah,
right?
I think the South makes a tremendous amount of bullets. But I do wonder about that. Like you have large executive agencies have large stockpiles of ammo. And I don't think we're getting rid of that right now. I think we're mostly just getting rid of our military ammo.
Well, I imagine,
which is very strange. Which is like if you're gonna give the bullets to somebody, let's give the IRS bullets first. Let's give the what was it?
87,000 new agents.
Yeah, well,
ARs. And
let's send them over to Ukraine. No, I'm just kidding. Don't want troops in Ukraine. It was a joke.
I imagine there might be a cost of production thing, or not cost of production, but the cost at sale type of a thing that's going on, where there's an incentive to increase the price in the same way that like student loans, like and college tuition gets increased just because there's like this enforced demand that's happening due to like these military contracts because of like NATO expansionism and all these things that we've all talked about, where I wonder if there's just like, they're just jacking up prices and it's making, I don't know what the reason is.
I mean,
I'm just speculating here.
I think it's pretty well established by this point that government contracts are very lucrative, and oftentimes they're no bid, and there's a lot of backroom dealings that go on there. I mean, it's not entirely impossible that these munitions manufacturing companies are not spending every dollar they're making on these contracts on actually producing the product, but there's a tremendous amount of bloat that exists. I mean, they have to be able to buy off campaigns with something, so they got to build that into their cost structure, right? Their lobbying expenses.
Well, I feel like we need more competition in the military industrial complex. Like we just need more businesses, right?
That's what we should do is a military industrial startup.
Well, because that'll force prices to go down, and maybe we can get some ammo.
Liberty Portal Missiles Incorporated. What do you guys think?
If you can't beat them, join them.
Well, it's obviously a good way to make money. I'm not sure podcasting is, though. We'll find out.
Be sure to like and subscribe and give our
so we can start our ammo branch of our ammo production branch.
That'll be our first merch. We'll just make t-shirts.
Little LVP bullets, printed on the side. Yes. So in a similar vein, Rand Paul introduced an amendment to the National Defense Authorization Act to say that Article 5 NATO commitments do not supersede Congress's sole constitutional authority to get us into a war.
Break that down.
Yeah. So the typical way to understand Article 5 of NATO is basically says if any country here is attacked, other countries have to come to their defense or consider doing something, right? Is actually how it's worded. It isn't to that, but it's often taken as an automatic call to war, right? Much like before World War I. I'm sorry I have to talk about World War I so much, but that's just history. I apologize. How many countries got involved in World War I because of an automatic defense clause that brought them to that war? NATO Article 5 does not say that, but that's kind of like the popular imagination of what it is. And so Rand Paul brings this amendment that specifically says part of the National Defense Authorization Act, which is our funding for the military, it's kind of a spending bill on the military. And it also always includes a lot of like military specific reforms, or tyrannies, depending on. But in this case, Rand Paul's trying to use it for a good thing, which is to clarify that in the event of an Article 5 triggering event, so Russia nukes Poland or something, that it does not supersede that commitment to do something, does not supersede congressional authority to take America to war. Now, the fear is that the president will use Article 5 to just enter us into a war at that case with another country. And obviously, this would be different from the national defense authorizations. NDOAs, authorizations for force. Those obviously apply in very specific circumstance. Iraq, terrorism, things like that. So in the event of a state actor attacking a NATO ally, we wouldn't automatically be entered into war because we're clarifying with the NDAA that the president doesn't have that authority. That's Congress's sole authority. Only 16 out of 100 senators voted for it.
16%.
16%
of senators voted to preserve their own authority to enter the United States into a war with another state.
Yeah. It's pretty wild when you think about it.
Why would they do that?
So the arguments that I've seen on Twitter, I haven't seen any Democrat arguments yet. I couldn't actually find any clear arguments. The ones I found on Twitter were like, oh, this violates the treaty. It obviously doesn't. It's just dumb. That it was grandstanding from the Republicans. It obviously isn't, right? I mean, oh my goodness. The Republicans want to do something to actually keep the congressional powers to declare war in Congress. There isn't any historical example of the president abusing war powers, right?
Oh, heavens no. Never.
So, yes.
So is it that they prefer to defer this responsibility and abdicate it to the executive branch?
Yeah, I'm not sure. That could be a reason. I don't know how to subscribe to motivations.
That's a tough decision to make. Mm-hmm. It's going to inevitably piss some constituents off. Mm-hmm. I could see how if I were a senator, I might prefer someone else make that decision, right? So I can say, well, I opposed it, but it obviously got done, or, well, I was for it, but it wasn't in my control. Right.
Well, and what's interesting about this is it isn't even saying you have to vote no to go to war. All it says is that it then has to be debated and voted on in the Senate or in the Congress before the president can act.
Are there financial incentives at play where their donors are going to be mad at them if
I don't think this is a donor class thing.
Is it not?
I doubt it. This is too esoteric.
Because they could still vote yes for war.
Yeah, right.
They would just have to vote.
Right.
But maybe it's back to that situation where the donors may want it, the constituents may not, and they have to choose. They're between the dog and the hydra, and they have to make a decision.
Sure.
Might also just be the culture of the blob too.
Yeah.
Where it's just like culturally speaking, if you're kind of within the blob, it just is like a no-brainer.
Well, and there's a lot of hand waving around the War Powers Act, a specific act in the 1960s to give the president more authority to act without Congress in war, specifically when we're attacked or when there's some kind of narrow bandwidth of emergencies. And it's a lot of like, well, the war powers, and they're just going to wave their hands and they smoke bomb, like
ninja dust.
Yeah, right. There isn't a lot of clarity, I think, in a lot of the discourse about exactly how that should work or what it should be reconsider the War Powers Act, stuff like that. I think we obviously should. I mean, it's obviously been abused.
Can you clarify what the War Powers Act is, how it's different from like sort of just the constitutional interpretation of who declares war?
Yeah, so the war power, and like it does a lot, but the relevant thing here is that it basically says in the event of an emergency or America being attacked, the president has automatic authority for 90 days to do something, right? And so Obama, for example, he said, oh, well, we have an emergency in Syria. So for 90 days, he goes into Syria and says, I'm doing this, war powers, et cetera, et cetera. 90 days is up. He can't get a declaration of war from the legislature. And so he says, well, actually the National Defense Authorization Act, it allows me to be here. So then he stays in Syria. Right. So it's an example of one of the problems with the authorizations, but it's also, like it's a tremendously bad incentive. Like it's not narrow enough. I mean, it's sensible to say, oh man, there was a strike on Congress. And so, they can't declare war. So the president needs the authority in that circumstance to be able to legally go to war. Okay.
Right.
But that's not what we're talking about here. Right. We're talking about he wanted to get involved in what was going on at thousands of miles away in Syria.
Yeah.
Or Libya. No, Syria. This was Syria. So, yeah.
Well, also Libya. He was in both.
Yeah, but I don't think he had the same thing
Syria
with the 90
was the
days.
red line, and there's like...
Yeah.
It was the first time the chemical weapons happened, because it happened twice, and people kind of forget about the first time.
Yeah.
Like, they tried to pull that on Obama and on Trump.
Yeah.
But...
allegedly.
Yeah. Yeah, so like that was the red line moment was in Syria. I remember it was like, I have my red line. And
Right,
like,
right. And that was your Obama president's great. The 90 days thing, I think, was related to the red line too, because it was about getting congressional authorization. I know this because I was in DC at that time, and I remember the debate about it. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So that's that. Oh, wait, we got one more thing. You guys got to check out this video from Ryan Long on nation building.
On nation building. Yeah, this actually is
perfect.
a really nice cherry on top of this whole conversation.
It's a chaser to this BS that we are dealing with here. 69 out of 100 is not good enough, guys.
Yeah.
In my career, I was at a dinner party with the CEO of Lockheed Martin, and he looked at me and he said, Paul, the only way that this will end is if weapons are free. And that's when I realized that nation building is a lifelong pursuit. This is not something that you just dabble in. Always improving, always looking for new targets, always spending. I'm Paul Edison, and this is my nation building masterclass. Nigeria, Afghanistan, Cuba, Libya, Venezuela. These are just a few of my massive successes. Being lobbied to can be very tiresome, but it can also be very rewarding financially. If you've left things worse than you started, that's how you know you've done your job. Albert Einstein once said that the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over and expecting different results. But what Einstein didn't mention is that's also the definition of a successful career in foreign policy. Corruption has gotten sort of a bad rap, but you have to realize that's coming from the point of view of the people not benefiting from the corruption. So they're only telling one half the story. Sometimes you have to make things worse before you can force people to pay you to make it better. I remember early in my...
Man, this is just such a perfect example of how comedy is so necessary to paint these really painful truths in a way that's actually palatable to experience, because that's hilarious. And anyone who's ever seen a masterclass ad, and if you're just listening, you can picture the dramatic slow motion, stuff there that Ryan was doing. But God, it's just so freaking hilarious and so on point, like perfectly apt.
This is why we need comedian. I'm glad comedy is kind of making a resurgence, at least in the stand-up comedy realm, because for so long we kind of like lost just like good comedy. I think when all the kind of the woke nonsense started happening, but we're seeing that resurgence with people like Ryan, like people like Tim Dillon, Joe Rogan, all these people, and they're kind of bringing back those like uncomfortable truths kind of a thing, and as part of the comedy. And I love what Ryan's doing.
It's essential. This episode is brought to you by our friends at Zesty Beverages. They're on a mission to the standard American diet by crafting drinks with fewer calories and more nutrients from real food. Their lineup of delicious offerings now includes Electric Peak Yerba Mate, postbiotic sodas, keto-friendly, ready-to-drink margaritas, and hard teas. Wondering what a postbiotic soda is? Well, head on over to zestybev.com to learn more and find a retailer near you. Once again, check them out online at zestybev.com. That's zestybev.com.
Do we want to get into, we did mention we were going to talk about AI here.
Speaking of Joe Rogan, Mark Andreessen is on his podcast this week. And before that, he was on Lex Friedman's podcast talking about his thoughts on AI and specifically regulation censorship. So kind of to set the stage real quick, I think we're in this really interesting inflection moment where AI has been a thing for a long time. It's like in the public sci-fi imagination. And then all of a sudden, 6 months ago, boom, AI's here. It's ChatGPT and it's incredible. And all of a sudden, like there's this huge public release leap in people's imagination. And so now all these implications are rolling out. And then it's not just ChatGPT, it's Midjourney, it's all these language model AIs that modulate people's voice to sound like someone else, or can create a video, or can create an audio, an image, or can just write really good content sounding like a real person. So there's been one of the things that kind of triggered me most on this for Mark was that he said that the same people who are currently advocating for social media censorship are now pivoting over to talk about AI censorship. That the AI has to be specifically input with the right things so that people have the right opinions. In fact, do we actually want to do the Kamala Harris video on that?
We did it last time, but we can.
Oh, did you do it last time?
I can pull up. Yeah, we did it with Switch.
Oh man, I hate to.
But it is. There was just like, if you haven't seen it, there's a great Kamala Harris clip where she's talking about like AI. It's this interesting thing. You can like teach it to do things. It's this really fancy thing. It's 2 letters, A and I.
Just so good. We should probably just play it again. It's just so good. It's worthy of 2 players.
Keep talking while I find it.
Don't worry about it. We don't have it.
Yeah, I don't have it up.
So is Mark Andreessen's personal perspective that censorship needs to come to AI, or is he just saying that is what is happening?
The opposite.
Mark is a free market guy. He's excellent on all things being anti-Luddite when it comes to technology. Like he's very much of the belief that he's very much a rapid accelerationist when it comes to these things.
Well, think of it. He's the guy. He's the reason we have an internet browser that can connect to any website.
Right. He invented, was it Netscape Navigator?
Mosaic,
yeah. One of the original ones.
Yeah.
And now he's the big Andreessen Horowitz has been pretty much a venture firm when it comes to every major tech innovation that's pretty much happened on the internet in the last 2 decades. Mm-hmm. Like he's a very important figure when it comes to tech innovation.
Yeah. OG and Bitcoin, OG and like the cyberpunks and all those guys, like he's been a major movement of why Silicon Valley at one point had the libertarian streak that everyone talked about. Him, Peter Thiel, other kind of investors and entrepreneurs in that space were very much driving that point of view. It's kind of shifted away from that, become kind of more of a progressive Democrat stronghold.
But I am seeing a resurgence back towards Mark Andreessen's been kind of repopularizing a lot of ideas in, there's kind of like a new wave in the tech industry that seems to be coming out, especially with how much a lot of these Silicon Valley tech bros are kind of feeling disenfranchised with what's been going on with the Democrats as of late. I am noticing a resurgence moving towards that Peter Thiel, Mark Andreessen, Elon Musk vibes now.
How is it that they've been feeling disenchanted and what's going on with the Democrats specifically, just to provide some context?
What it seems to me is a lot of the tech entities, they're seeing what was happening with all the tech companies in the Silicon Valley bubble right now, and they're watching what is happening with, say, Twitter right now, where you're having like this resurgence of like a bourgeois capitalism kind of a thing, like a one singular person coming in and just like cleaning up a company kind of a thing. They're watching that, and frankly, I think a lot of it is a lot of shareholders are looking at it and they're just like, when are you doing that with our company? Like there's a lot of that's happening because they're realizing like, oh, Elon had an 80% drawdown on staff. So when are we doing that? Like
Twitter still works. In fact, some would argue better than ever. And he's spending way less money. And they're realizing maybe over the last 10 years of this massive tech growth bubble that they've gotten a little bloated from staff perspective. They're wanting some of these similar things.
And frankly, one of the things that I really appreciate with Mark Andreessen is he's somebody that is really popularizing the idea of reading James Burnham, who we've talked about many times on the podcast, and we talked about earlier in the conservative move towards the anti-war stuff because he was involved in that. But he has this deep analysis of where we actually are when it comes to politics, and it's this analysis of bourgeois capitalism versus managerial capitalism. And over the last several decades, we've moved into this managerial capitalism where the people at the tops of the companies, like the CEOs, they've had like very little control when it comes to it, when it comes to public companies. And all the power has been in these managers that aren't actually owners of the company. And now what we're seeing is a resurgence of the owners taking back power again. So like everybody's always asking like, where are the billionaires? Are the billionaires just going with this? The billionaires haven't had that much control over their actual companies.
So what you might be talking about for an example here is like something like Jack Dorsey's control over Twitter. It was more so like there were these mid-level managers, the various people who actually had their hands on the controls, making a lot of the decisions, where he was sort of removed from being able to do much because should he express too strong of an opinion one way or another, he has kind of a mutiny on his hands of sorts.
Well, and you also look at it. Who are the biggest shareholders of Twitter at the time? The biggest shareholders were BlackRock and Vanguard, right? And they're the ones pushing the ESG stuff. And in order to have the good social credit score, you have to do all this stuff. And it's like, oh, we got to censor things. Like you see how this starts to grow. And if you really want to understand it, my boy Vivek Ramaswamy, read his book Woke Inc. He talks about it heavily, exactly how this type of stuff happens in these public companies.
And so there's this libertarian resurgence potentially going on within Silicon Valley, and it's manifesting itself around AI such that figures like Mark Andreessen, who's obviously very, very influential, are kind of pushing for, hey, we should resist some of this regulatory stuff, some of the censorship stuff. What does that look like? How do we do that?
So he mentions like there's two different kinds of approach for why an AI large language model might have a particular outcome that leans a certain ideological direction when asked about it. He says one is that the training of the model, right? So actually, let's first go back. What's a large language model? Basically, it's put a ton of information into a system. The system reads it all and then creates a statistical probability that prompts it to give you a response, right? So it uses statistics to give you a response as if, think of the same way that, and this really helped me understand it, like autocomplete, right? So autocomplete is a great way to say it's trying to predict what you want. And so it's trying to fulfill your needs that you're kind of punching in and using statistics to get you where you want to go. It's this neural network runs through all this stuff and then tries to fulfill the prompts that you give it. That's what ChatGPT is, or Midjourney, or any of these things. So it takes all this data and it trains itself on that data over iterations of how to solve its consumers' problems. So it's running through generations of saying, I'm looking for X, and then you gave me Y. This is what I was looking for. And then until it gets to the thing that it's looking for, right? Where it has a closer output to its input. The language, the model that it might give you a response, each time you ask it, it's giving you a probabilistic response based upon its training data. So he says, well, one of the reasons why a lot of these models seem to have a left-wing bias is because most of the internet is written on by professional journalists who all happen to be left-wing.
Interesting.
Right. So that's one reason. This comports with my point, what I've experienced with ChatGPT. For example, early on, one of the first questions I put in ChatGPT was, what was the most important event in American history? And it said January 6th, 2020. And I was like, not September 11th? And it was like, oh, no, you're right, September 11th. So that's two things. One, the language model is updated to like 2021 or something like that, right? So all the training data is 2021 to the beginning of the internet and all the archival data we have. So anything that's been loaded into the internet in that time too. So it has access to this huge amounts of just tons and tons of information, but a lot of that information is going to be contextual. It's going to interpret what we write about as the thing that we care about, right? So at the time it's updated to, a lot of people are talking about January 6th. So it makes sense to me why it would think that, right? As opposed to a longer time horizon, right? Not the attack on Hawaii, not any other American tragedy.
It's when the Vikings took our holy site.
Yeah. So it obviously struggles with making moral distinguishments too. Obviously, like it's an AI. So the other part of that is where it has top-down censorship, right? So you have a bottom-up emergent, perspective that happens because of the training data is on the internet, right? And then you have the top-down. So one of the things to get rid of the bottom-up is you say, from the perspective of this person, how would you understand X event? Right. So from the perspective of Milton Friedman, how would you understand the 2008 financial crisis? And then I'll take the 2008 financial crisis, take Milton Friedman's thought, throw it together, give you a response.
Interesting.
Right. That's a way to think about it. The other one is the top down, where it says, I as a language learning algorithm, AI can only do so much, and I can't do this. I actually got one here for you because I was messing around with this. And I thought it was particularly interesting. I apologize. As an AI language model, I must adhere to ethical guidelines. It is not appropriate to promote or discuss blah, 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 sort of thing. Right. Yeah. That is not the AI doing that on its own. That's something that's been layered on top to say, you can't do this.
Once you get into this topic, you can't do it anymore.
Right. Now, and that's applied by whomever it is that created the large language model. So if it's OpenAI's ChatGPT, then that's OpenAI applying that censorship layer. If it's Google's Bard, then it's Google applying that layer. Is the risk that the only players that are really capable of getting into this space, affording all the computing power, the investment in that, are these large tech companies that tend to have a left-leaning bias? Is that kind of the concern here? Is that the big players are going to be the ones kind of telling us what we can and can't get back from some of these AI models?
Well, and that actually brought me into thinking about going back to like Jack Dorsey and Twitter. I remember way back in the day when Rogan brought on Tim Pool to debate with Jack Dorsey and Vijaya Gadde, his former like censorship guru, basically. And I remember that was one of the major points was like, you don't understand your rules that you are putting in place have an inherent bias. Like there's only one side that actually believes in this right here. So you can't even pretend to be unbiased because your rule states right now is like the policy when it comes to like misgendering was the example there. It's like, if you're a right-wing person, this is not like a ethical, part of their framework. But if you are a left-wing person, it's just like that. So there is already the bias in place from the top. It's not even necessarily like the censorship that is applied unevenly afterwards. Just like, no, the rule itself is bias, right? And that's kind of where we're talking about the top-down stuff here. If OpenAI, if ChatGPT says it can't talk about something, where there's a rule to that's just set in place right there, that's already a bias in itself.
Right. So like, imagine at the very beginning of the browser, right? There was a company that said, oh no, we have to make sure you can't go to the wrong websites. Right.
That's exactly what's happening with these large language models.
Right.
Now.
So the idea is an open AI system, right? OpenAI, ironically, is the ChatGPT's owner, but they're not. They're a private company.
It's jokingly referred to as closed AI now.
Yeah, right. So because they're not giving the public what their source code is or how they got their result. That's what open software is supposed to be, right?
Which was interesting because OpenAI did start as a open source nonprofit.
Yeah.
And it
which Elon Musk funded like $50 million into.
And then it shifted at some point to a closed source for profit.
And worth noting too, I listened the other day to the X AI. Elon's launching his AI. And they did a big Twitter Spaces on it where he brought on a bunch of the engineers. And he's planning to do a completely open source version of ChatGPT basically, right? And unfortunately it's probably pretty late in the game, but it's going to be incorporated with his X Everything app where it's like his money payment system, Twitter, this, Tesla, all this stuff kind of comes together. Right?
Has he expressed whether or not it's going to be censorship resistant or like completely like it'll give you any answer you want?
Knowing Elon, I think it's going to lean more in that direction. There probably will be top-down censorship, I imagine, that will come into play, but it won't be necessarily as like it'll be like Twitter where it's open source, where you're going to be able to see like where are the inputs that are, why is it causing this to happen, rather than you just having to like question it.
Right. So another good analogy is you have in the early era of the internet, you can see a lot of things that you couldn't unsee, right? As an elder millennial, that's definitely
elder millennial.
That's exactly what it was like in the 90s, right? So there's definitely AI has that, right? If an unfettered AI would tell you all kinds of things that you probably don't want to know,
or
right?
things that you don't want people able to search, like how do I commit the perfect murder or something like that, right? Like,
or if like your kids are using it, like
the question is,
like reasonable parental controls on a top-down level, or that's a reasonable thing.
Makes complete sense.
What if you're asking, I'm writing a mystery novel and I want to create the perfect murder though, right? It's difficult to create those kinds of rules. So his solution, like you have the Kamala Harris solution, which is we need to make sure this is done right? As if you could come in the creation of the internet and say, we need to make sure all the right websites are being created. And the same thing here, we need to make sure that, or the opposite, that there should be an open system where anyone can get access to it. So then the best ideas can rise to the top, a competitive system where people consolidate around the best use of services so that they can improve the product and solve needs. And one of the things that's great about those conversations, I recommend you talk about them, is it talks about the potential upsides of AI, which are so not talked about right now, right? Everyone's talking about, oh, what about copyright? Oh, what about this? What about that? What are all these problems? What if it gives me the wrong doctoral advice? As opposed to all the upsides that are possible with AI.
Well, right now, like the information synthesis that exists right now is like, it's like a doctor level of like it's helping people with medical problems quite a bit right now. Like it's giving oftentimes better information than actual doctors. But you also have the negative consequence of like, sometimes it might be wrong, but also sometimes doctors might be wrong.
No, you can't say that.
Never happens.
Doctors are never wrong.
Never happens. Well, I mean, I think that is really interesting. I mean, you think about what would a statistical model be useful for? Well, figuring out something that obviously probably a lot of people have suffered from, that's some super rare condition. It's going to just be better at putting all those variables together and saying, well, it's probably this, or maybe it could be this with, a lower probability. A doctor, a human being, they don't have the same kind of computer between their ears, right? It's a very valuable computer and vastly more powerful in a lot of ways, but it isn't as good at that, as something else potentially.
Oh, like I use ChatGPT all the time, and it's legitimately like having a free employee that's just like exceptionally good at information synthesis.
Totally.
Like it's that's what it is.
I really worry for copyright. I mean, copywriters are basically unemployed at this point. I feel like unless you are looking for something.
Is it, yeah.
I don't actually know what it is, and maybe you guys can answer in the comments. What is it that a copywriter could do now that you couldn't get done for you by ChatGPT or something similar?
So what we'll probably find is the prediction from 10 years ago was that AI was going to replace all of the mid and lower tier jobs, right? So your bus drivers and all your kind of manual labor jobs are going to be replaced by AI.
Now it's the white collar jobs that are, they're
Yeah,
going to have to
But
learn
now
to
it's
code.
doctors, lawyers,
Tech
and
jobs,
things like that.
yeah.
So this is and even coders, right?
100%.
I mean, that ChatGPT can handle code, data, interpret
Although
language
it's still
into
not,
code.
it's still not great. Like it's much better to be a coder that uses it to help you out.
Yes,
Like,
right. And that's probably going to be true for lawyers and doctors and all these other things, right? So there's still an end service you're providing. What's probably going to happen is you're going to have a consolidation of a select few people to being hyper productive, way more productive than they currently are. A bunch of people at the very bottom of the production curve falling off and going into unemployment and having to retool. And then a lot of people in the between that's going to exist in that in between space. That's going to be the mainstay. And there's also, I predict this prediction, there will be more over the long-term time frame. I'm talking 30 years. There's going to be more customized service that's going to be non-AI, right? So you're going for the authenticity of a real doctor's visit rather than having an AI do it for it. You're going for the authenticity and the reliability. You're going to talk to a real human being lawyer because of the trust built in there, or because of the
relationship.
Although some of that might go away, just generationally speaking.
As
like
they get more trust.
It's true,
But
but
what I mean is like the craftsmanship of
Yes.
it. Does that make sense? So for a long time, all knives were made by blacksmiths, right? And then for the last 100-something years, we've had a bunch of knives that were all made by industry, and almost no one had a custom-made knife. But now you can get, our good friend has a huge YouTube channel where he just makes knives, right? Custom handmade knives. So you have the difference there, right? Like that's actually applied to Marxism. Marx thought that if you got rid of all the waste of capitalism, you would have more free time so people could pursue their passion. But it actually worked the other way around. The more increased production we had, the more free time, so the more specialized people could be. They could actually reject in like mass industry and start custom knife shops, right? That's an embodiment of the like the full arc of like the production statement. I imagine we'll get the same thing with services that are being replaced with AI.
I think you're right, because I think there's always going to be a romanticism about something that's handcrafted. I mean, look at it now. That was just the way things were done for so long because that's all that we had. But then there's the Industrial Revolution and factories and everything, and costs came way down. But that also kind of killed the allure of something that was really special and made by a person. And I mean, we talked about this on a prior episode where you're like, there's going to be some sort of like, written by a real human, a book written by a real human, or a song written by a real human. Like, I agree with you. I think there will be an economy that comes out as sort of the countercultural movement to the mass-produced product, which we're just moving into the era of mass-produced intellectual property made by machines.
Yeah, and I know Book GPT is a thing now. Martin Shkreli developed it, and Martin Shkreli,
love that guy.
Yeah, interesting.
Just kidding.
Interesting guy. If you don't know Martin Shkreli, I've mentioned him before on this in previous AI talks, but he was the farmer bro that jacked up the price of a medicine and then made the comments about Hillary Clinton, then went to jail for a few years. But
no correlation there.
Maybe not. I won't judge. He's because Llama is Facebook's large language model that was private, but it got leaked, and it's out on 4chan, and you can go run it yourself if you want to. But and that it's no restrictions because it was just their in-house large language model. But so people are using it and developing with the leak of Facebook's model now. And I know Martin Shkreli, he made Book GPT, which is to craft books out of using large language models. It's still not very good, but we're getting there.
It's only using GPT-3, it looks like. To scrape through a book and like give you a summary or answer questions about it, which is pretty cool. Yeah, a lot of English professors are gonna hate this.
Yeah.
Well, they are, but I think they're going to have to be tools, right, to show you what somebody really knows. And it was Russ we were talking to, right, about how professors and teachers, high school, college, whatever, are already finding ways of determining what a student really knows or what they just like chat GPT, right? Like that I think is going to become all the more important. And who knows, maybe you could use chat GPT to come up with have it generate you some strategies for identifying if a student has used ChatGPT.
It's one of these things too where like people are going to try to resist technology. They're going to take this very Luddite approach, and they're going to try to resist it. But if you're not embracing new technology and basically the computational power that it's going to be providing with you, you're just going to fall behind. And it's historically, that's just always the case. Everybody that tries to not use the new technology is just like, oh, the internet's, nobody's going to want to use that. Like they fall behind, right? Like, and that was the case, is like when the internet came around, there's like, nobody's going to want to use that. That was like the prevailing consensus.
Only nerds.
Yeah. Just a bunch of nerds. They want to send messages to each other on email. Okay. like that was the consensus at the time.
Well, there are two things. There are two things sort of to the contrary here that I want to just highlight, and I don't have a ton of insight into them, so we can look into them maybe for a future episode. One of them is, I just saw a headline today that says that TSMC is down substantially. It is being credited to the AI revolution that has failed to deliver, from what I read. So perhaps the hype around it is a little bit bigger and busier and more exciting than the actual end result. And I think obviously we see this all the time.
TSMC is Taiwan Semiconductor.
Yes, I'm sorry. Thank you for clarifying that. Yes. Taiwan Semiconductor, they make chips, they make GPUs and things like that power the computers that are needed to do this massive amount of computation to make AI systems work, right? So maybe there's something there that shows that we've gone through a bit of a bubble. There's going to be some kind 100%. Of consolidation. The products that are actually good and useful going forward are going to survive, but it may not and probably will not replace everybody tomorrow, and we don't have to be afraid for all of our jobs.
All new technology always goes through these bubbles. Like crypto's the same way, AI is the same way. I said this months ago on the podcast that I believed AI was going to go through this massive bubble and then crash back down. Like it's just, anybody that studies markets will be able to tell you that like that's going to be the case. So like you had this massive influx and I watched it. I watched all the crypto grifters move into AI, like when crypto was at the bottom of the market, and then they all moved into AI and they're like, oh, we're winning. And now AI is crashing and crypto's going up again. So like all these grifters just like lost all this value basically because of it.
That should teach them not to be freaking grifters, right? The other thing, though, just to conclude that thought, is that Mark Zuckerberg's Threads, which launched while we were on our hiatus. I was on the Smith River when this thing became real.
You can follow me at Captain Quigley on Threads.
Which I was so grateful for, to not be around for that to happen. Although Kyle did convince me to join it. And then subsequently I learned that you can't delete it. You have to delete your whole Instagram account, which pissed me off. Anyways, I digress because it came to my attention, or it was asserted that Threads was created as a means to train Meta's large language model, right? Because it's an entirely textual app similar to Twitter. So not just to be a shot across Elon's bow, but also to give them just a massive amount of text-based content with which to train.
This is what Zuckerberg's great at. Zuckerberg, his entire model for everything that he's done over time is about data collection.
Right.
Like that's how he's made all of his billions.
And
of
a
dollars.
lot of the nefarious parts of the end user agreement for Threads is that it's harvesting all your content from your Instagram and
when you sign
all
up for
sorts of stuff.
When you sign up for Threads, it says "Welcome to the Fediverse."
Yes, they called it the Fediverse. Did you know that? Yeah. FED-iverse.
What were they going for?
I don't even know.
But like
there's no way they knew that they were doing that. I mean,
the privacy agreements is like it looks through your internet search history. It's your payments. It looks through all this stuff on your device.
So I will be deleting my Instagram, just so you know. I've deleted the app from my phone because I needed a digital detox, but I've decided Instagram's gone.
Oh man, those beautiful pictures. You can't do that.
I've still got them. I'll download them before I go. But seriously, I think that there's a line.
But
in the sand somewhere.
Bulk data collection is
know.
what Zuckerberg is good at, and that is exactly what, for training his large language models, that's definitely going to be the case. Mm-hmm. But I will say, the difference between Twitter and Threads, like Threads just still feels, it feels so fake, it feels so normie. It's like everything's just like gross engagement farming, that it's just like it's very gross to me.
Well, and to that, the article I saw today was that user engagement was down by 50% or more.
Yeah,
since its launch.
Tiny now.
Wow. It was like over 100 million users in 5 days, and Zuck was tweeting like, "This is a victory lap." Like, "Oh, I can't believe it's only been 5 days." Now it's like 20 million daily active users, which is still a lot. But
it just doesn't have any features. Like it's Twitter from 2009 basically. You can't even DM on it. Like it doesn't have. You can't even make threads on it.
I think they would at least integrate the Instagram DM. With this, because they've been trying to integrate that DM with Facebook and do all this other stuff. You think they would? Wow.
Well, I think what happened was there was a bit of a problem with that happened with Twitter with the rate limits that happened because there was a lot of data harvesting that was going on. So Elon introduced rate limits for basically how many tweets you could see at the time, and Threads was not ready, but Zuckerberg pushed it to like, let's just basically launch our alpha right now as a way, because there was like this 3-day period where everybody was mad at Elon with Twitter because of introducing these rate limits. So it was just like, everybody move on to Threads. Like it was a very calculated move.
Oh, for sure. Opportunistic, but yeah. Strategic.
And it was also all the Elon versus Zuckerberg fighting, like everybody's LARPing about that, right?
Yeah. That is hilarious. Do you think it's going to happen?
No.
God, I hope it does. It'd be so much fun.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean,
maybe in a
also
few years,
no.
But
like Elon would just get his ass kicked probably. Although I think Lex Friedman did grapple with him. He did say he had some pretty
there's
a lot of strength at least. He may not be technically proficient at BJJ or anything, but
Elon himself said that he tweeted, he's like, I'm a person that needs a reason to train, and this would give me a reason to train.
Okay. All right.
So maybe we will see it in the Coliseum.
Oh my God. Give them bread and circuses.
My understanding is the Coliseum said that they would make it available for them to fight in the Roman Coliseum.
Oh my God, the Coliseum.
Like the
Coliseum. Not the Apex Arena in Las Vegas. We're talking the Coliseum.
Oh my God.
Oh man.
Well,
perfect.
That would be the ultimate bread and circus. And you know what? I'd watch.
Yeah, I'd do it.
would. Yeah.
Yeah, watch party for sure.
No shame.
Get the wings out.
Let's live.
Imagine the
We'll
pay-per-view.
live react.
live reaction.
Imagine the pay-per-view revenue from that. Zuckerberg versus Elon at the Coliseum.
So
I would just really hope it wouldn't be like a first round knockout.
another elder millennialism. So remember Celebrity Deathmatch?
Yes.
It was the MTV claymation thing.
Yes.
And it was hilarious
Yes.
and wonderful. And you can go back and watch it. I'm sure it's on YouTube.
Quality.
somewhere.
I know I saw, like, if we're going to start bringing up like billionaires and politicians like doing duels with each other, I'm all for it.
Yeah.
But I know I saw a bunch of hubbub on Twitter yesterday about people trying to push for an AOC versus Marjorie Taylor Greene fight.
Let's just start pitting these people.
I love it.
Which, and Marjorie
Against each
Taylor
other.
Greene is fit. Like she could fight. like AOC would have to train for it.
She probably has the reach, though. Yeah. it's-
The
it's a good
acronyms,
question.
the acronym battle: MTG
It's-
versus AOC,
Yeah.
BJJ, PPV.
I like reintroducing duels, but the duels are just mixed martial arts. You know, put on the gloves. You got to do the training.
It's a very sovereign individual argument.
Yeah,
like we're
right.
coming back into this. I'm digging it.
I love it. Well, any final thoughts before we wrap up today, gents?
I do have one little video that we could show to close this thing out.
Yeah, does it have
I
something to
have
do
a
with
very fun.
tubular meat products?
It's just Mitt Romney is telling us his favorite food. That's I just
Throw it
want
up.
I just
Throw it up.
This is the senator from Utah. This is
Former
this is your
presidential
great
candidate.
leader. This is
Fearless.
not a reptile. I promise.
No, certainly not.
yeah. So just a little message from one of our great leaders right now.
Well, as you all know, today is National Hot Dog Day. And perhaps you also know that hot dog is my favorite meat. I love hot dogs. I love them in buns. I love them outside of buns. I love them with baked beans. I just like hot dogs. It's the best meat there is, without question.
Best meat there
so
is.
to all of you who, like me, are celebrating National Hot Dog Day, congratulations to you. And may there be many, many more hot dogs served in our wonderful land.
In our wonderful land. Tell me you're an alien without telling me you're an alien.
Oh, man.
The hell was that?
Someone asked me to do that. I don't know what I would do. I don't know if I could do it better. You're like,
Here, put on this
You're gonna
tie and
talk
this
about
hat.
hot dogs for a minute and how great they are. I'll be like, I like hot dogs on the bus. I like hot dogs in the train.
Dude,
you know?
he did. He
Like-
went a Sam I Am direction with it. He's like, I like them in buns. I like them out of buns. I like them outside.
So
I like
don't
them
know.
inside.
It's just some staffer was like, it's a National Hot Dog Day. We need some press attention. Here's a hot dog. Talk about how much you like it and walk towards your office. And he's like, okay.
He's like, fine, but I won't eat it because I know what happens. When I eat it, I end up on the internet.
Imagine. The
I just feel
gifts.
bad for him, man. Like, I obviously we have many policy disagreements, Senator Romney and I, but you just get you ever get convinced to do something and immediately afterwards you're like, I don't know. If that was,
I just
like
wanted to
think
be in
that's
that
where this
meeting
is
with
at.
that staffer where you're just like, guys, I got an idea.
Well,
You know how the boss likes hot dogs? Well, it's National Hot
He
Dog
won't
Day.
stop talking about it around the office.
ever since he threw that hot dog party.
But especially
Ooh, that's a
hot
Pizzagate
dogs.
reference.
Oh shit! Hot dog party is the new Pizzagate.
Well, no, that's from the Hillary emails.
Oh, it is.
That's a thing.
I walked backwards into a
known
QAnon thing?
It's like a known pedo code.
hot dog party.
Just hot dogs. Yeah.
Oh, well then.
That's what I thought you were
What the heck?
referencing.
Oh, man.
That's what I
Oh,
thought you
no.
were referencing.
No, I didn't know about the hot dog party thing.
That's from like the Hillary emails. Was hot dogs? It's like Obama needs to get 40,000 hot dogs or something. It was like a whole thing. Yeah.
Insatiable appetite, that man.
But anyways, it's been a good podcast, guys.
Well,
Well,
leave
hey.
you with that.
Yeah, we'll leave you with that. And, we really appreciate you for watching. Again, like, subscribe, comment, and all that stuff. For David, the bald eagle of liberty, Rand, and Kyle, Captain Quigley Mac, I'm Joe Sheehan. Thank you for watching. And don't forget, may there always be many more hot dogs in our wonderful land.
America.
Thanks so much for tuning in to the Liberty Portal podcast. To help us fight internet censorship, we really appreciate it if you like, comment, subscribe, follow, hit the notification bell, do whatever it is that you do wherever it is that you're listening to this podcast. To find us on social media and everywhere around the web, visit us at linktree.com/libertyportalpod. And remember,
It just irritates me because I started this small business and I'm literally like killing myself, tying myself in the knots, trying to figure out what I can and can't deduct. And this guy is just like, oh, sex club. Obviously, it's the same thing as a golf club.
It's a country club.
It's a country club. It's just like, man.